My podcast was called Debunked: Myths We Need to Stop Believing. 43 episodes dismantling conspiracies, pseudoscience, and cultural delusions. Flat Earth, ancient aliens, homeopathy, crystal healing. Each episode methodically presented evidence, exposed logical fallacies, and interviewed actual experts. I had 280,000 subscribers who trusted me to separate fact from fiction. Episode 44 was supposed to be about Bigfoot, the ultimate American myth. Blurry photographs, fake footprints, and people seeing bears in every shadow. I planned a 3-part series: the psychology of belief, the economics of hoaxing, and interviews with skeptical wildlife biologists. I'd title it, Sasquatch: The Billion-Dollar Mistake. I spent 6 weeks in the Pacific Northwest gathering material, interviewed believers, examined evidence, hiked the forests where sightings concentrated. I approached it with journalistic rigor and scientific skepticism. Then I found something that shouldn't exist. My name is Alexis Chen. I'm 34, Stanford journalism degree, former fact-checker for NPR, professional skeptic. I built a career on exposing false beliefs. I was good at it, proud of it. Now I'm the subject of my own episode. The rationalist who encountered something that shattered rationality. The debunker who found something that can't be debunked. This is the story of how certainty becomes doubt, how skepticism becomes protection, how the truth I found was more dangerous than any lie I'd exposed. The project began in August 2024. My producer, Josh Kaplan, suggested Bigfoot as our next topic after polling listeners. 70% want cryptids, and Bigfoot is the king of cryptids. Plus Pacific Northwest, great excuse for field recording. I researched for 3 weeks before leaving Los Angeles. Read every scientific paper on the subject, all 14 of them, most concluding insufficient evidence to support existence of large, undocumented primates in North America. Reviewed the famous footage, Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967, obviously a person in a suit. The Freeman footage, laughably fake. Thermal images that were clearly bears. I interviewed Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum via video call. He was the rare credentialed scientist who took Sasquatch seriously. Professor of anatomy at Idaho State, published papers on bipedal locomotion. Dr. Meldrum, you've built a career studying something most scientists consider fiction. How do you justify that? He smiled patiently. I study evidence. Footprint casts showing dermal ridges and mid-tarsal breaks inconsistent with known fauna. I follow data where it leads, not where consensus dictates. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and footprints can be faked. Indeed they can, which is why I've devoted 30 years to distinguishing authentic from fabricated. The question isn't whether all evidence is real. It clearly isn't. The question is whether even one piece of evidence represents something undocumented. And you believe one piece does? I believe the data suggests something merits serious investigation. But belief isn't required, only methodology. I thanked him and filed the interview under well-intentioned but ultimately misguided. The man had convinced himself based on pattern recognition and hope, classic confirmation bias. Next, I contacted the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. Matt Moneymaker, the founder, agreed to an interview in person. We met at a diner in Seattle. You think we're all crazy, he said before I could ask a question. I think people genuinely see things they can't explain and construct explanations that fit cultural narratives. And you're here to expose us as delusional or fraudulent. I'm here to understand why intelligent people believe in something without physical evidence, no body, no bones, no DNA, just stories and ambiguous images. He leaned back, considering. What would convince you? If you saw one, would you believe your own eyes? Seeing something doesn't make it real. The brain constructs reality from incomplete data. Optical illusions prove that, so no. Seeing wouldn't convince me. Physical evidence would. Then you're in the wrong business, he said, because sometimes the most important truths can't be held in your hand. Sometimes you have to trust experience over expectation. I filed that under epistemologically bankrupt but emotionally compelling. The man was sincere, probably saw a bear once and built an identity around the misidentification. I spent 2 weeks in Washington State, Olympic National Forest, North Cascades, Gifford Pinchot. I hiked popular encounter sites, set up audio recording equipment, interviewed local believers. Each person had a story, vocalizations at night, massive footprints, brief sightings at distance. Each story had alternative explanations, known wildlife, misidentified tracks, Pareidolia. I recorded everything. The atmospheric forest sounds, the believer's earnest testimonies, my own observations about the psychology of belief and the beauty of the wilderness. Great material for the podcast. Then, on day 16, I hiked into a remote section of the Cascade Range following a tip from a Lummi Nation elder named Thomas Whitehorse. He'd agreed to an interview about indigenous perspectives on Sasquatch. "You're looking for truth," he said when we met at the trailhead, "but you're looking with the wrong eyes. You want proof you can measure. Some truths can't be measured. Then how do you know they're true? Because they change you. Real truth isn't something you possess, it's something that possesses you." He gestured toward the forest. "There's a valley 3 miles north. My grandfather showed it to me when I was young. Told me the Sasquatch live there, the wild people. He said they'd show themselves only to those who came with respect instead of conquest. You're saying they'll appear if I approach correctly? I'm saying you won't find what you're looking for, but you might find what you need." He smiled. "Though I suspect you won't like it." I thanked him, marked the location on my GPS, and hiked north. Another interview subject romanticizing mystery. Another data point for my thesis about belief and cultural identity. I had no idea I was walking toward the end of certainty. The valley Thomas Whitehorse described opened before me around 3 p.m. Steep walls covered in old-growth cedar and Douglas fir, a creek running through the center, understory thick with salal and sword fern. No human trails, no signs of previous hikers, just pristine wilderness that felt somehow separate from the forest I'd been traveling through. The silence was different here. Not absence of sound. The creek burbled, birds called, wind moved through the canopy, but absence of discord. Everything harmonized. I'd been in dozens of wilderness areas, but this place felt distinct, ancient, watched. I set up my recording equipment on a flat boulder near the creek. Shotgun microphone for directional audio, omnidirectional for ambient sound, digital recorder with 48 hours of capacity. Professional setup. I was committed to doing this right even if I was documenting delusion. While adjusting levels, I noticed something odd. Tree marking. Several cedars bore vertical strips of missing bark, scored into the exposed wood at heights around 8 feet. Too high for elk, too regular for bear. I photographed them extensively. Good visual for explaining how natural phenomena get misinterpreted as evidence. I recorded my field notes. Day 16, approximately 3:15 p.m., unnamed valley in Cascade Range. Observing bark damage consistent with previous reports from Bigfoot enthusiasts. Alternative explanation. Seasonal elk behavior, possibly trees used as mineral licks or territory marking. The patterns appear deliberate, but this likely represents pattern seeking by human observers rather than actual intentionality. Then I heard it. Vocalization from somewhere north, deeper in the valley. Long, modulated, starting low and rising through what sounded like interrogative tones. Not an elk bugle, not a bear, not a mountain lion, not any animal in my mental catalog of wilderness sounds. My hands were shaking as I checked the recording levels. Perfect capture. Clear, distinct, analyzable. This was exactly what I needed. Ambiguous audio I could send to wildlife experts for identification. Response call from the south. Different voice, shorter duration, different tonal structure. Call and response. Communication. I sat frozen, scientific training warring with growing unease. This could be owls, I told myself, or ravens, or coyotes at unusual pitch. The forest creates acoustic anomalies. Sound travels strangely in valleys. There's an explanation. Third call. This one closer, much closer. East of my position, maybe 100 yards. The sound reverberated in my chest. Infrasonic components below normal hearing range. Movement in the peripheral vision. I turned my head slowly. Something large in the understory, moving parallel to my position. Not walking, flowing. Navigating dense brush without disturbing it. Like water finding the path of least resistance. I raised my camera. Telephoto lens. Image stabilization on. Settings optimized for low light. Professional equipment. Professional approach. Document. Analyze. Explain. The figure that emerged into a small clearing 90 meters away ended my professional approach. Approximately 2.5 meters tall. Bipedal. Covered in dark brown hair. Massively muscled through shoulders and arms. Moving with purposeful efficiency. Not human, not bear, not ape. Something else entirely. I got 7 seconds of footage before my rational mind reasserted itself. This is impossible. Therefore, this isn't real. Therefore, I'm experiencing a perceptual error. Bears walk upright. People wear costumes. I'm seeing what believers see, interpreting normal wildlife through the lens of expectation. But the creature turned and looked directly at me. The face, heavy brow ridge, flat nose. But the eyes. The eyes held awareness I'd seen only in great apes and humans. Intelligence, consciousness, recognition that I was watching it. Then it was gone, simply melted back into the forest with the silence of smoke dissipating. I sat there for 3 hours, recording running, trying to process, reviewing the footage frame by frame. The proportions were wrong for a bear. The movement was wrong for a human. The behavior was wrong for anything I could categorize. My podcast was supposed to debunk this. Instead, I just documented it. In my field notes, voice shaking, I don't know what I need. Analysis, expert consultation, sleep. I need to understand what I just saw, because what I think I saw violates everything I know about wildlife distribution in North America. I hiked back to my car in gathering dusk, equipment packed, footage secured. Driving back to my motel in Darrington, I called Josh. How's the debunking going? I need you to look at footage I'm about to send. Tell me what you see. Ooh, did you catch someone in a gorilla suit? Just watch it. Tell me what you see. No context. Just observation. I sent the file. Waited. 10 minutes later, he called back. Alexis, what the hell am I looking at? You tell me. It looks like, it can't be, but it looks like an actual Bigfoot. That's what I thought too. So what, we got punked? Someone knew you were coming and staged this? No one knew I was going to that specific valley. I decided that morning based on a last-minute interview. I paused. Josh, what if it's real? Then we have the story of the century. Then you've documented something science says doesn't exist. Then your podcast becomes the most important episode in debunking history. The debunker who found the one thing that's actually real. That's what I thought too. Story of the century. Career-defining moment. Vindication of investigation over assumption. But sitting in that motel room watching the footage on loop, I felt something unexpected. Dread. Not excitement. Not triumph. Dread. Because if this was real, everything changed. And I wasn't sure the change would be good. I spent 3 days analyzing the footage frame by frame. Sent it to 5 different wildlife biologists under anonymous accounts, asking for identification. Responses ranged from black bear standing upright to primate behavior inconsistent with known North American fauna, to compelling but insufficient data for definitive conclusion. No consensus. But importantly, no one definitively dismissed it as fake. I consulted with Dr. Sarah Pemberton, forensic video analyst I'd worked with on previous episodes. She examined the footage for signs of digital manipulation or costume artifacts. Alexis, I can't find evidence of alteration. The lighting is consistent. The shadows match solar angle for that time and location. There's no green screen artifacting, no masking errors. If this is a hoax, it's the most sophisticated one I've analyzed. Could it be a costume? Possibly. But the hair movement is very naturalistic. Individual strands responding to wind, body movement affecting overall texture. That's expensive suit technology, movie grade. And the proportions are unusual. Arms are too long relative to height for normal human wearing padding, unless someone specifically built a suit with prosthetic arm extensions and highly articulated joints. But possible, but implausible given your circumstances. Who would invest $50,000 in costume technology for a random encounter with a podcaster in an unmarked valley? I thanked her and sat with the evidence. Every rational explanation required increasingly elaborate conspiracies. Occam's razor suggested the simplest explanation. I'd filmed something undocumented. But accepting that meant accepting I'd been wrong. Wrong about Bigfoot. Wrong about the believers I'd planned to gently mock. Wrong about the fundamental boundaries of what exists in North American wilderness. On day 4, I returned to the valley. Not to debunk, to understand. I set up equipment in the same location and waited. Hours passed. Creek sounds, bird calls, wind, normal forest. Then as light began to fade, movement. 3 of them this time. The one I'd filmed, I recognized the gait, the size, plus 2 others. One slightly smaller, one juvenile. Family group. They didn't hide. They approached to within 30 meters and stopped, watching me, evaluating. The large one made a sound, low, Complex, clearly directed at me. Not threatening, questioning. I responded on instinct. I don't know what you're saying, but I see you. I recognize you're real. The juvenile made a sound that was startlingly like laughter. High, brief, playful. The smaller adult put a hand on the juvenile's shoulder. Gentle, parental. I was watching a family, not animals, not monsters. People, different people, but people. The large one reached into a pouch I hadn't noticed before and withdrew something, set it on the ground between us, then stepped back. Gesture clear, gift, offering, communication. After they disappeared into the forest, I approached carefully, found a woven basket, beautifully made, cedar bark with complex patterns. Inside, dried fish, berries, and something else. A carved bone pendant, intricate geometric designs, art, aesthetic expression, culture. I picked up the pendant, felt the smooth polish of handling, the intentional symmetry of the design. This wasn't wildlife. This was civilization, just not human civilization. That night in the motel, I drafted the podcast episode, started writing about the evidence, the footage, the implications, got 3 pages in and stopped, because I realized what publishing would mean. Research teams, media attention, congressional hearings about habitat protection and species rights, hunters wanting trophies, researchers wanting specimens, the entire machinery of human curiosity and commerce descending on this valley. I'd built a career exposing misinformation. But what if the truth was more harmful than the myth? What if mystery served a protective function? What if debunking the myth meant destroying the reality? In my notes, spent 43 episodes teaching people to question beliefs. Now facing the hardest question, when truth endangers, is silence moral? Can knowledge be unethical? Should some facts stay hidden? I called Thomas Whitehorse. You found them, he said. Not a question. Yes. And now I don't know what to do. That's the real test. Not whether you can find truth, whether you can hold it responsibly. I spent a week paralyzed between professional obligation and ethical responsibility. My podcast existed to expose truth. I'd found something true. Publishing seemed inevitable, necessary, definitional to my work. But I couldn't stop thinking about that family, the juvenile's playful sound, the parental touch, the gift they'd offered. They'd trusted me with their existence. Publishing felt like betrayal. Josh was pushing for release. Alexis, this is the story. This validates everything we've built. The skeptic who found something real. It's perfect. It's complicated. How is truth complicated? Because truth has consequences. Because exposure equals extinction for a species that's survived by staying hidden. That's not our responsibility. We document reality. What others do with that reality is on them. Is it? If we publish and researchers descend on this valley and these beings are captured or killed or driven out, we're not complicit in that. We're journalists. We expose truth. That's the job. I consulted ethicists, anthropologists, conservationists. Ask the same question. Do I have moral obligation to publish what I've found? Dr. Margaret So, bioethicist at University of Washington. The question is whether these beings can consent to being documented. If they're conscious, intelligent beings, which your description suggests, then documenting them without consent is violation of autonomy. Would you film an uncontacted human tribe and publish without permission? Dr. James Morrison, wildlife biologist. From conservation perspective, documentation is usually protective. How can we protect what we don't officially acknowledge exists? But this case is unique. Traditional conservation depends on public support. Public support means public awareness. Public awareness means exposure. And for a species that survived through invisibility, exposure might be existential threat. Dr. Helen Chow, anthropologist specializing in indigenous knowledge. Western science demands proof, replication, peer review. But many indigenous communities have protected this knowledge for millennia through oral tradition and selective sharing. By publishing, you're not just revealing species' existence. You're overriding indigenous protocols about sacred knowledge. That's colonial epistemology. Assuming your right to know and share supersedes their right to protect and contain. Every conversation deepened my uncertainty. I'd built a career on certainty. Facts versus fiction, evidence versus belief, truth versus delusion. Now I was learning that truth exists in context, that knowledge carries responsibility, that some facts serve better as secrets. I returned to the valley on day 12. Needed to make decision, but needed their input. Felt absurd. Consulting with beings I couldn't verbally communicate with about whether to expose their existence. But the absurdity felt more ethical than deciding unilaterally. I found the same clearing. Set up my equipment, but didn't record. Instead, I brought materials. Printed photographs showing what publication means. News crews, research teams, helicopters, crowds. Also brought photographs showing protection, wilderness preservation, legal sanctuary, recognition without exploitation. The large one appeared alone this time. Approached cautiously. I laid out the images, explaining verbally even though I didn't know if he understood words. But tone carries meaning, and pictures carry more. I showed the negative images. Invasion, capture, crowds. His body language changed. Tension, alarm. Then the positive images. Protected forests, legal barriers, sanctuary. His posture softened. But when I tried to explain that protection requires proof, that the world won't protect what it doesn't acknowledge exists, he made a sound I interpreted as refusal. He picked up the negative images and handed them back to me. Message clear. This cannot happen. Then he touched the positive images, touched his chest, touched the ground. This is already protection. This place, this privacy, this invisibility. He pulled out materials and drew in the dirt. Figures of his people scattered across mountains, diminishing over time. Then one figure alone, pointed at himself, pointed at the valley. Last place, last refuge. I understood. They weren't thriving. They were surviving. Maybe 30 individuals across the entire Pacific Northwest. Publication wouldn't just expose them. It would finish what habitat loss and climate change had started. In my field notes, I came to debunk a myth, found in endangered people. If I publish, I'm complicit in their extinction. If I don't publish, I'm lying to my audience. Both choices feel like betrayal. One betrays listeners. One betrays living beings. Which betrayal can I live with? The decision crystallized during my final visit to the valley. Day 15. I came at dawn with the choice already half made but needing confirmation. The family was there. All three of them plus an elder I hadn't seen before. Female, gray hair mixed with brown, moving with deliberate care that suggested age. She sat on a fallen log, watching me with eyes that held depth I couldn't measure. The large male gestured, "Approach." I sat across from the elder, feeling like I was attending a council I'd been invited to but didn't fully understand. She made sounds, complex, modulated, structured, language I couldn't decode. But the younger female translated through gesture and expression, showed me their history through movement. Many, many figures. Then fewer, then few, then almost none. Showed me threat, mimicked sounds of helicopters, trucks, human aggression. Then showed sanctuary, this valley, this silence, this invisibility. The elder reached out and touched my face. Gentle, searching, looking at me or into me, I couldn't tell. Then she made a sound that resonated in my chest. Not threatening, pleading. She withdrew something from a pouch at her waist. Photographs. Old ones. Polaroids from the 1970s and 80s. Showing humans with their people. Researchers maybe. Or photographers. People who'd found them before. Then she showed me what followed. Newspaper clippings documenting expeditions. Research teams. Hunters. The cascade of exposure. And finally, a photograph of this valley. Empty. The implication clear. Exposure led to exodus. Exposure meant losing home. She was showing me pattern. Every time humans documented them, they were forced to move, forced to sacrifice territory they'd occupied for generations, forced into smaller, more marginal ranges. The cumulative effect was slow extinction. My podcast would be one more push toward the edge. The elder handed me all the photographs, the evidence previous investigators had collected, proof that I wasn't the first to find them, proof that each finding led to loss. Then she added something else, a small journal, handwritten, dated 1987. I opened it carefully. My name is Dr. Marcus Webb. I came to these mountains to document the species locals call Sasquatch. I found them. I photographed them. I studied them for 3 months. And then I watched research teams arrive. I watched the family I'd befriended flee from helicopters. I watched habitat destroyed by trampling researchers and curiosity seekers. I am the reason they're endangered. This journal is my confession and my warning. Some truth causes more harm than ignorance. If you who read this have found them, please do what I failed to do. Protect them by staying silent. I closed the journal, looked at the elder. You've been through this before, multiple times, and you're still trying to teach us, still hoping we'll learn. She made a sound, soft, sad, affirming. The large male approached then, placed something in my hands. The carved pendant they'd given me earlier, plus something new. A USB drive in a waterproof case. Modern technology they'd somehow acquired. I'd look at it later. On it, footage. Clear, undeniable footage of their people. Ceremonies, family life, tool-making, culture. Everything I'd need to prove their existence definitively. They were giving me the choice, the power, the evidence, but also the responsibility. The elder made one final gesture, pointed at me, at the USB drive, at the ground, then covered the gesture with her hands, buried it, hidden, kept, in my notes, written there in the clearing while they watched. They're giving me what every investigator wants, proof, but they're also teaching me what I didn't know I needed to learn. That power includes the power to refuse, that truth-telling isn't always truth-serving, that the highest form of knowledge might be knowing what not to reveal. I came to debunk a myth. I'm leaving as a keeper of truth too dangerous to tell. I made my decision, final, irrevocable. I returned to Los Angeles on day 17. Josh met me at my apartment, eager for the episode draft. Tell me you've got something incredible. I have incredible, but I'm not publishing it. His face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger. What do you mean you're not publishing? That's the entire project. That's months of work and tens of thousands in expenses. I mean, I found something real, documented it thoroughly, and determined that publication would cause direct harm to endangered beings. So I'm not publishing. Alexis, you can't be serious. We have a responsibility to our listeners, to truth. We have a responsibility not to cause harm. That supersedes entertainment value. This isn't about entertainment. This is about scientific documentation, about expanding human knowledge, about satisfying curiosity at the expense of survival. These aren't specimens, Josh. They're people, a few dozen individuals hanging on in fragmentary habitat. Publication means extinction. We argued for 3 hours. He called me unprofessional, compromised, delusional, said I'd been captured by the romance of belief, that I'd abandoned skepticism for sentiment. You've become exactly what we've been debunking, he said finally. Someone who puts feelings above facts. I'm putting ethics above exposure. That's different. It's betrayal of the project, of our listeners, of scientific method. Then I'm a betrayer. I can live with that better than I can live with extinction I caused. He quit the next day, sent a formal resignation citing irreconcilable creative differences and ethical disagreements. Within a week, he'd started his own podcast called The Truth Untold, with a debut episode about when investigators betray their mandate. He didn't name me directly, but everyone knew. Comments flooded in. What happened to Alexis Chen? Did she find something real and chicken out? Another rationalist who couldn't handle being wrong. Sad. She probably got hoaxed and is too embarrassed to admit it. Career suicide. My Patreon supporters started leaving. Lost 40% of funding in 2 weeks. Emails demanded explanation, refunds, apology for wasting our time and trust. I released a short statement. After extensive investigation, I've determined that the Bigfoot phenomenon, while culturally significant, doesn't merit the 3-part series I'd planned. Instead, I'm pivoting to other topics that better serve our mission of examining belief systems and evidence. Vague, unsatisfying, deliberate. Friends in journalism reached out with concern. Alexis, what happened? You were so committed to this project. I couldn't explain. How do you tell people you found something real but refused to document it? That truth-telling felt like murder, that you'd violated every principle of journalism because ethics demanded it. The isolation was profound. I was carrying knowledge I couldn't share, had made a sacrifice no one could appreciate. I'd ended my partnership, damaged my reputation, compromised my income, all to protect beings most people thought were fantasy. My sister Maya called. I'm worried about you. Josh says you had some kind of breakdown in the woods, that you've become paranoid and irrational. I'm fine. You don't sound fine. You sound like you're hiding something. I'm just reconsidering my approach, thinking about the ethics of exposure. Since when do ethics prevent you from exposing truth? That's your whole brand. Maybe my brand needed adjustment. But the external pressure was nothing compared to internal conflict. Every day I questioned the decision. Had I been manipulated? Had I anthropomorphized animals into people? Had I abandoned rational skepticism for emotional response? I reviewed the footage and evidence repeatedly. No, they were real. Yes, they were intelligent. Yes, publication would endanger them. But doubt lingered. The cost was so high. My career was essentially over. Josh had been right about one thing. I'd betrayed my listeners' trust. Then I received an email from an anonymous account. You made the right choice. You're not alone. Others have chosen protection over publication. We support each other. If you want contact, reply to this email. I replied, and entered a network I didn't know existed. The network called itself The Keepers, melodramatic name for a serious purpose. 37 people across North America who'd encountered the beings, documented evidence, and chosen silence. Researchers, photographers, rangers, indigenous community members, all carrying the same secret, all paying the same costs. We met via encrypted video calls, faces obscured, voices modulated, operational security against potential exposure or coercion. The first call, a woman spoke. I'm a wildlife biologist. Found a family group in Olympic National Forest in 2019. Collected hair samples, recorded vocalizations, photographed them, then destroyed everything. Lost my university position when I refused to produce research results. But they're still alive, still hidden. That matters more than my career. A man, Forest Service ranger. I've known they exist for 15 years. Filed false reports to keep search parties away from their territories. Lost promotions for lack of diligence. But I've watched them raise their young, pass down knowledge, survive in shrinking habitat. My reputation is nothing compared to their lives. Around the circle, similar stories. Each person had found evidence. Each had chosen protection. Each had paid professional or personal costs. Then came the reason they'd contacted me. We've been monitoring your situation. Josh Kaplan has been asking questions, offering money for your footage, contacting your sources. He's determined to prove you found something real. He doesn't have access to my files, I said. He's hiring people who can get access. Data recovery specialists. Hackers. He's convinced you're hiding the story of the century. The network coordinator, a woman whose voice carried authority. We can help you secure your data, but we need to know. Are you committed? Because the pressure will increase. Josh won't be the last person who tries to force exposure. I'm committed. They trusted me. I won't betray that. Then prepare for escalation. People who want to believe will call you hero. People who want proof will call you obstructionist. The scientific community will demand you submit evidence for peer review. The cryptozoology community will accuse you of hoarding glory. And those beings you're protecting, they won't thank you. They'll just continue existing, unknown and unrecognized. I understand. Do you? Because this isolation is permanent. You can't prove you're right. You can't defend your choice without revealing what you're choosing. You'll be the podcaster who found nothing, or the podcaster who found something and cowardly hid it. Either way, your credibility is destroyed. Are you truly prepared for that? I thought about the elder's face, the juvenile's playful sound, the carved pendant I kept in a locked box, the journal from Dr. Marcus Webb warning future investigators. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. 2 weeks later, Josh published his podcast episode, Alexis Chen and the Evidence She Won't Share. 42 minutes of speculation, interviews with disgruntled sources, analysis of my behavior suggesting either hoax complicity or mental health crisis. She went into the woods a skeptic and came back a believer, he said in conclusion. But she won't show us why. That makes her either a fraud who's hiding failure, or someone who found something extraordinary and betrayed everyone who trusted her with truth. Either way, she's finished as an investigator. Because investigation without revelation isn't investigation. It's just tourism. The episode went viral. 800,000 downloads in 3 days. Media coverage, YouTube response videos. My mentions flooded with accusations and mockery. I received death threats from Bigfoot believers calling me a gatekeeper. I received threats from skeptics calling me a fraud. Everyone was angry at me for different reasons, but united in certainty that I'd betrayed something. They were right. I had betrayed something. I'd betrayed the expectation that truth must always be told, that knowledge must always be shared, that documentation equals discovery, equals publication. but I'd kept faith with something more important. Living beings whose survival depended on my silence. In my journal, they're calling me coward, liar, fraud. Let them. Their opinion of me is temporary. The beings I'm protecting are irreplaceable. I can survive being wrong in everyone's eyes. They can't survive being right in everyone's knowledge. It's been 9 months since I returned from that valley. My podcast is defunct. My reputation is destroyed. Josh's competing show has more subscribers than I ever had. I work freelance fact-checking now. Anonymous, invisible work. Pays enough to live on. Doesn't require public credibility. I'm no longer invited to journalism conferences. Stanford removed my profile from their notable alumni page. Friends stopped calling. Maya speaks to me, but with careful concern, like I'm fragile or delusional. I live quietly, and I protect what needs protecting. The network provides purpose. We monitor reported sightings, gently redirect researchers, work with indigenous communities to preserve habitat. We're not celebrated. We're not thanked. We're just people who found something true and chose responsibility over recognition. Last month, I received a package. No return address. Inside, a new carving. More sophisticated than the pendant. A complete scene rendered in bone. Figures around a fire. Family, community, life continuing. And a note in careful, deliberate handwriting. Thank you, T.W. Thomas Whitehorse, who'd guided me to that valley knowing what I'd find, trusting I'd make the right choice. Teaching through experience rather than argument. I keep the carving with the pendant. Private museum of evidence I'll never show anyone. Proof I'm not delusional. Proof that sacrificing credibility was worth it. Sometimes I draft the podcast episode I'll never publish. Episode 44. When Debunking Fails. The Myth That Turned Real. I write the introduction, structure the arguments, imagine releasing the evidence. Would be vindication. Would prove I was right. Would also end everything I'm protecting. So I save the draft and encrypt it. Another file that will stay buried. People ask what happened to me. Why I abandoned the podcast. What I found in those mountains. I tell them the project didn't pan out. That I realized Bigfoot content would compromise my skeptical brand. That I'm focusing on more impactful topics. Lies of omission. Truths left unsaid. The only ethical option available. Because here's what I learned in that valley. Some truths are too dangerous for public consumption. Some knowledge causes more harm than ignorance. Some beings have earned the right to remain unknown. Western science demands proof, replication, peer review. But what if some realities can't survive that process? What if documentation equals destruction? What if the highest form of knowledge is knowing what not to reveal? I went into those mountains to debunk a myth. I found living conscious beings with culture and family and the misfortune of being scientifically unrecognized. And I learned that my obligation to truth was secondary to my obligation to life. The skeptic community says I betrayed reason. The believer community says I betrayed their vindication. Scientists say I'm withholding data. The media says I'm a cautionary tale about what happens when emotion overrides evidence. Let them say it. Let them be certain in their judgment. Certainty is comfortable. I remember that comfort. I lived in it for years. Now I live in something harder. The knowledge that I'm right and can never prove it. That I protected something irreplaceable and will never be credited for it. That I chose ethics over acclaim and will be remembered, if remembered at all, as the podcaster who went into the woods and came back empty-handed. But they're still there. That family, that elder, that juvenile who'll grow up in that valley without helicopters, without researchers, without the machinery of human curiosity destroying their final refuge. They're still there because I'm here, silent, carrying truth I won't tell. Some secrets of the forest are not discovered. They are entrusted to those willing to be diminished by keeping them.